Vermont Agency of Agriculture. I'm our produce program manager, and I'm joined by Gina Clithero, who has been leading our buyer outreach initiative that we'll talk about today. I'm actually filling in for Gina's closest collaborator on this project, who's Dominique Giroux, who is unable to be here today. So I really want to thank both you and Dominique for really executing this project and making it successful. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of the project, and then Gina's going to talk about the results of this initiative. So we launched this initiative in August 2019, and our idea was to begin communicating with buyers of Vermont produce about on-farm produce safety. Our overarching goal for this project was really to develop and strengthen the relationship with produce buyers, and in turn more holistically support our Vermont produce farms in making on-farm food safety improvements and helping us to implement the produce safety rule. So we were really hoping to both share information about produce safety in general, what types of audits or other certification programs were available to produce growers in Vermont, information about how the produce safety rule was being implemented in Vermont, and also to gather information about buyer produce safety requirements and answer buyers' questions. So it was really a both information gathering and outreach project. So we prioritize reaching any buyers who purchased produce from Vermont farms. So our scope in this sense was pretty broad. We looked at reaching any produce distributors, aggregators, food hubs, local retail co-ops or individual retail stores, and food service management companies. So in terms of who is a buyer, we were looking at a pretty broad set of entities, really any entity that purchased produce from Vermont farms or who we believe were likely to do so. So and after that initial contact that we'll talk about in a little bit with our buyers, we provided some fact sheets and other information about produce safety in Vermont, and then scheduled 30-minute calls to discuss that information. We had a few key project goals here, and the first was really, again, to establish and build relationships with buyers of Vermont produce. We wanted to support buyers in their understanding of the produce safety rule and understand what produce safety standards are required of Vermont produce suppliers. We also wanted to increase awareness and answer questions about the CAPS program. So CAPS, again, is Community Accreditation for Produce Safety. It's a program of the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association that is run in coordination with Hans at UVM Extension. And we at the Agency of Agriculture also conduct some audits for the CAPS program. So not all farms in the CAPS program complete audits, but it's an optional addition to the program. So we're going to talk briefly about planning and execution of this project, and then Gina will discuss our project outcomes. So again, the scope of our project was really Vermont specific, but broad in terms of the types of buyers we wanted to reach. We really wanted to reach any type of buyer of Vermont produce. And to get this done, we first built an initial contact list of companies, individual retail stores, any food hubs, aggregators, distributors that we believe purchased from Vermont farms. And this is when it gets a little bit confusing in terms of deciding like, well, who is a buyer of produce, and does it matter if we categorize them as a distributor or a food hub? So Gina actually built a really complex, in some ways, Excel spreadsheet to catalog all of this information so that we had all of our potential buyer contacts in one place before we got started. We established a set of standard questions for our 30-minute calls with the buyers, and we developed a fact sheet that we sent out when we initially made contact with an individual or a group of individuals at a company, and then we also sent that fact sheet as a follow-up again after our discussions. And we developed an initial outreach email, and this is where it's important to, as somebody already mentioned, get in touch with the right individual. So one of the kind of barriers to executing this project was that we know that so-and-so is the produce buyer at this store, but they may not be making the food safety decision. So part of the initial outreach email was really to let the buyer know about the scope of our project and that we wanted to speak with at least one person who was responsible for making a decision about any produce safety requirements. So the project really ran pretty smoothly from that point where, sorry, I'm getting into some PowerPoints, where we sent that initial outreach letter and the fact sheet to our contact list. In some cases, that might have been a really generic email list for the company, or even one of those email contact forms where you don't even know who's receiving the email at the company. And again, we asked that they provide the most appropriate contact to discuss the produce safety requirements. In some cases, we might have been speaking ultimately with 3 or 4 people on a call. In other cases, it was just one individual. So we really found that 30-minute meetings worked really well over a conference call to discuss any produce safety requirements that buyers had and to provide information about our program, about CAPS, and about implementation of the produce safety rule in Vermont. And we had at least 2 people on each call from our program. So one person to speak or to facilitate the conversation and another person to take notes. In some cases, we also had 1 or 2 additional people on our calls. And then we provided follow-up information after each call on specific areas that the buyers were interested in. So they might have been particularly interested in learning more about the CAPS program, or they might have just wanted some more information about on-farm readiness review. So we really tailored that information to be exactly what they were interested in receiving, so they weren't overwhelmed with too many fact sheets and other links. So I'm going to pass this off to Gina at this point, and you can talk about the results of our project.
Thank you. All right, so as Kristina mentioned, we were doing 30-minute calls, and this outreach project is kind of considered like the first phase, but not like the end. This is kind of just a first stab at it, and we are presenting it here to kind of get your guys' input as well, and talk about some different next steps that we plan on taking. So over the course of about 3 months, from August to November, we met with 20 different companies or organizations, and so 20 meetings, each 30 minutes, 10 hours in total in these meetings. And as Kristina mentioned, we sent follow-up emails specific to what buyers are most interested in learning about. And then over the course of the project, the materials that we developed, you'll see them in front of you. So we developed this kind of like summary of what we've done so far, but then also the outreach letter that Kristina discussed that kind of like gives people an intro to the program, some standard meeting questions, and a fact sheet specific to buyers about what buyers really need to know about the business produce safety rule. So that's all here at your disposal if you want to use it in your states to do this similar outreach. Oh, right, and then this pie chart shows the distribution of buyers that we spoke with. Mostly small retailers from co-op stores, so like natural food stores that are community-owned, distributors and aggregators, which are generally food hubs, and then a couple food service management companies, and 1 food bank that has a wholesale program with the purchase from Vermont farms. And so, in general, an overview of the impact so far. So our program, the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, we learned from the buyers that we spoke with about what their requirements are, and we are now using that information to inform our market access work that we're doing a lot in coordination with Hans and Weaving Extension. And some interesting facts that we've learned along the way in that. There was some interesting produce safety requirements that we found on these calls. A lot of the smaller buyers didn't have any produce safety requirements. Some of the requirements that we found interesting, there are folks that are doing site visits as a way of kind of like building a relationship with the farmer, and that also being kind of a step to have an assurance around produce safety. And based on the buyer, some have more or less knowledge of in like a background in agriculture. So that's just kind of like an interesting approach to verifying what practices are taking place. There was also one buyer we spoke with who accepts an organic certification in lieu of another third-party food safety audit, which we also found interesting. And so it's just, it was a great learning experience for us, and we are continuing to, further those market access efforts with that information. In general, we received really positive feedback from the buyers that we spoke with. People were really grateful that we reached out with this information. Oftentimes it was the first time they had heard of the produce safety rule, or if they had heard it before, there was some confusion around what it really was and who it's really impacting. And so as a result of this, we increased industry knowledge and supported buyers in getting a stronger understanding of the produce safety rule and also the difference between a produce safety rule and a voluntary food safety audit, as that is a real source of confusion for folks. And then we addressed questions and assumptions. In general, most buyers didn't know a lot about the FSMA produce safety rule, and so you'll see on the publication a list of common questions that we got. So these are questions that multiple buyers had about the FSMA produce safety rule. Oftentimes, it was spoken about earlier around certification as a result of an inspection. People oftentimes wanted to see inspection forms. Buyers were interested in getting that information. There was the primary question that folks had actually was, am I being regulated by the FSMA produce safety rule? And so the answer, eventually we adjusted the fact sheet to put that in bold, this affects farms, not buyers. Primarily, there are certain situations, of course, but primarily this was an educational, not a regulatory outreach project. So in general, the lessons that we learned, one would be to set realistic expectations around outreach. We really hoped to kind of, we wanted to reach out to a lot of people at once, but understand that scheduling is challenging. Anyone who's done the outreach work before understands that it takes multiple attempts to get anything concretely put on the schedule. So in total, 157 outgoing emails and calls were sent just to schedule 20 meetings. So that's some perspective for you in terms of the value of following up, but also understanding that sometimes it's just not going to work out, and that's okay, because there are other buyers that are really excited to meet and will move forward in that. And then another lesson that we learned is, as Kristina mentioned, consider asking multiple representatives from each company to meet. Oftentimes, especially with bigger buyers, the person who's doing food safety requirements will be a different person than the person who's actually involved in the procurement. And for us, it was really helpful for us to have both people in the room to really understand, or the virtual room, phone call, to really understand how the requirements are being verified, what it looks like, what's the onboarding process for a new vendor. So yeah, that's something we learned. Also, assure buyers that outreach is for educational purposes, not regulatory purposes. It's all voluntary, it's all for their benefit. And essentially, yeah, we as I mentioned, we spoke with a lot of small buyers who didn't have requirements, and there seemed to be kind of a sense of anxiety around not having any requirements. And these smaller buyers were looking to us, asking us, well, should we be requiring GAP? And we're like, oh, slow down. That's not really we're not really trying to encourage any particular food safety requirement. We're just trying to give you all the information about what farms are already doing for food safety, what the Vermont Produce Program is doing to support on-farm food safety, even for the majority of farms that aren't covered by the rule, who aren't getting inspected, and might not be getting inspected even if they are covered every year. In our case, they probably are, but anyway.
That's our plan anyway.
Yeah, only a few.
1 year in.
Yeah. And then finally, another lesson learned is to understand the state and federal information sharing rules. So as I mentioned before, a lot of buyers wanted us to be sharing inspection information, some of the questions that you'll see in the packet. So it's just important to be prepared for those questions when you go into the call. So the next steps for our program in terms of doing buyer outreach, we're going to continue to build out our contact list. As Kristina mentioned, ours is an Excel spreadsheet. You could do it kind of any way that you'd like. And we're going to, as we learn about other buyers and distributors, we will continue to add them to our list and get their contact information in the system, and then plan to update it annually each summer. And then we're going to continue to host meetings with buyers from our target outreach categories that we identified earlier. And then we will conduct outreach to additional buyer categories. So as we mentioned before, we were primarily looking at distributors, aggregators. We're trying to expand eventually to restaurants as well and to independent grocery stores. The level of engagement that we might have, we're not entirely sure if we're going to be doing 30-minute meetings with every single restaurant. Not sure if that's feasible, not sure if that's something that they would be interested in. But some other not necessarily lower levels, but less intensive levels of engagement we're considering, like sending out letters and emails and fact sheets rather than scheduling meetings with a broader range of buyers. And then we will collaborate with buyers to communicate produce safety information to growers. So one resource is that we've gleaned from this is that now buyers are really interested and engaged in supporting this effort. So they've offered to share our information with growers to kind of further, oftentimes growers would be really interested in hearing what buyers have to say. So for example, we've already sent some of our produce program pamphlets about what the produce program does, what services we offer to some small co-ops that are now showing those and making that available to their growers. And then finally, we plan to attend regional trade shows and buyer-focused events to share resources and answer questions, and partner with buyers to host the Produce Safety Alliance grower training courses. Hopefully in the future, that's way down the line, but eventually, we hope that can happen. So just in summary, again, this is kind of what Kristina shared at the beginning, but how can outreach to buyers strengthen state produce safety programs? This outreach can help ensure buyers and growers have the same general knowledge of the FSMA produce safety rule to reduce confusion and uncertainty in the marketplace. This outreach can also explain the role of state produce programs in implementing the produce safety rule, and then also helpful to understand buyer requirements to better support produce farms in the marketplace for internal program work, and increase the number of outlets for state produce safety program information sharing. So these are all benefits that your state could also see from conducting robust outreach to buyers. And then finally, as I mentioned before, this is just a list of the materials on your table. If you open up that outer packet, you'll see 3 sheets in there, and they're listed up here. A couple of them are communications templates, and then one is a fact sheet. But feel free to share or reproduce in whatever way you see fit. And that is all. I'm not sure if now's a good time for questions.
I also just wanted to add one thing that I should have added at the beginning. And one of the reasons why we turned to this project and we wanted to be really thoughtful about executing it is because the vast majority of farms that grow fruits and vegetables in Vermont are either not covered by the produce safety rules or are qualified exempt. So we know that in terms of direct impact on produce farms in Vermont, the produce safety rule is having more of an indirect impact in that it may be changing the produce safety landscape in terms of what buyers are asking for from the growers. And so we really wanted to, be available to buyers to answer their questions about produce safety rule implementation, about whether or not farms are even required to undergo an inspection. And we wanted to really be careful about walking that line and not encouraging buyers to start asking for things that they're not already asking for. So we wanted to emphasize that we are taking a neutral approach. And for example, as Gina mentioned, when somebody asked, well, should we have requirements? We said, not necessarily. Here are some other things to think about. And we also really wanted to talk really positively about Vermont farms and how so many farms in Vermont are being really proactive about produce safety, even though they may not be covered by the produce safety rule. So we really wanted to take a neutral approach, but also speak really positively about produce safety culture on farms in Vermont.
Thanks. Any questions for these guys? I have one.
Oh, Amanda? Yeah.
Amanda Kitchen from Mass Extension. Did you consider, I'm gonna raise the preventive control did you consider entertaining, including some parameters around preventive controls, particularly for some of the on-farm processing parameters to kind of raise awareness of that gray area that Gretchen was talking about earlier? And if you could talk about, if you did, why you didn't include it, or if it's in there and I didn't see it.
We did not include information about preventive controls, and I think the most obvious reason why we did not is because our program is focused on produce safety and funded by an FDA cooperative agreement for produce safety rule implementation. But that is a really good point, and I'm trying to remember if we had any questions that came up about on-farm processing.
I don't think so.
So, it'd be great to think about collaborating with maybe the Vermont Department of Health or something, another entity like that on future outreach.
Yeah, and we have this, great point, we have this divide, right? Preventive controls, produce safety rule, but on farms, increasingly, they're together in the same bucket. And I think it's really important that we think about making these resources and things flexible to absorb that. If we're gonna serve farms, we wanna do it holistically around those two rules.
Yeah, and I guess I would just put on the record, like, if we were gonna make a buyer guide, raising awareness that that is another part of the rule, particularly if some of the conversation we had earlier is that buyers don't even know about FSMA. It's not just about the produce rule, and there's that gray area. It's pretty gnarly, it's very no, but we should probably raise awareness to that component too. And even if it's, oh, by the way, there's another rule and it goes over into this direction, we just have to be real about that. And for those who know me, I already talked about the on-farm, and Michael and I have talked, it's an issue, and I don't want to stir a pot of it, and we're still kind of pioneering of where that regulatory body would be in that space. But I think to your point of, if the tools here are to create outreach and education and not the regulating body being aware of those two things, are important to put on the table in the same space.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Any other quick questions?
I just have a quick question. During your survey, when you were surveying buyers, did you run into any buyers that weren't buying Vermont produce?
Yes, kind of like in the earlier stage, so I would communicate with folks over email or with phone call, and I didn't know, and just clarify, like, are you actually buying fresh produce? Are you actually buying fresh produce from Vermont farms? So we never like wait to the 30-minute call with someone who wasn't actually buying Vermont.
No, I was actually, do you know if that ever resulted in them then looking to a local buyer?
Great, thanks. So thank you guys very much.